gonna get started just for the sake of time, so we can get to the main event, not me talking and introducing everybody, but thank you so much everyone for being here. My name is Lexi Johnson. I'm the new curator at One Archives at USC Libraries, and on behalf of the whole archive staff, we are just delighted to be hosting this event in honor of Sheree, Yetta, the book, Rated RX, Sheree Rose, and with and after Bob Flanagan. The One Archives is a very proud holder of the collection of Sheree and Bob's papers, and many of us on staff have worked with both of them and the other contributors as well. Thus, as many of you probably know, and I'm sure some of you have already read, this volume was just published by Ohio State. Yetta Howard is the editor, who is Associate Professor of English and Comparative Literature and co-director of the LGBTQ Research Consortium at San Diego State University. And so for the first part of tonight's event, Yetta is going to be in conversation with the inimitable Sheree Rose, who Yetta describes as thrilling, shocking, and inciting audiences around the world, beginning with her collaborative photography and performances with Bob Flanagan in 1981. After their conversation, we'll open it up to discussion that includes some of the other contributors to the book who are here tonight. Among us, Martin O'Brien, Amelia Jones, Rhiannon Aarons, Luka Fisher, and Judy Ornelas Sisneros. All amazing artists, scholars, activists as well. And you can find all of their bio information on our website, and I'll put a link, or Jean will put a link in the chat in case you want to go read that. If you have any questions for any of the panelists tonight, please put them in the Q&A box at the bottom. And if you'd like to use closed captioning, it's also available by clicking the box that says CC live transcript at the bottom, and that will appear. It's done by an AI robot. They're not bad, but not perfect, so just beware. And I think that's all the information from me, other than to say, on behalf of myself and One Archive staff, we're really excited to get this conversation going. So Yetta, the Zoom stage is all yours.
Okay, thanks so much to Lexi Johnson and Jean Vaccaro and everyone at One for organizing this event. Ideally, we'd be in person, but of course, you know, we got to deal with this through Zoom, and we'll try to have fun with it. You know, this book, Rated RX, would not be possible without the One Archives. The bulk of the images that are in the collection come from the Rose Flanagan Papers at One. And that's where I spent most of the time doing the archival research, and Sheree was with me during a lot of those archival trips. I also want to just quickly thank all the panelists and the contributors. In particular, I want to thank Martin O'Brien, because he is coming at us from the UK, and it's the middle of the night there. So thanks so much to all the panelists, but especially Martin because of the time. So again, we're thrilled to have some of the contributors join us for the open part of the discussion. After Sheree and I, you know, chat a little bit and you know, talk a little bit about her career and what's in the book. Amelia Jones, Martin O'Brien, Luka Fisher, Rhiannon Aarons, and Judy Ornelas Sisneros. I also want to, I know some of the other contributors are also in attendance. So if you are here and you want to, you know, chat, drop something in the chat, we'd be happy to engage you in conversation as well. I also want to dedicate this event to Grace Hansmeyer, who died tragically in September. And, you know, she collaborated with Sheree and is really a part of the larger, some of these larger communities in Los Angeles. And she is in the book as well as on the book. And I hope in a small way that the book can help to keep her memory alive and memorialize her. All right, well, why don't we get started? Sheree, do you want to start by saying saying a few things?
I'm just very happy to be here on Zoom. I would prefer to be in person to see everybody, but I'm glad we're doing this. Thank you so much, everybody, for participating.
All right. Well, I mean, I think that there's some people in the audience that may be very familiar with you and your work with Bob. And then there's some people in the audience who may be a little less familiar. So why don't we just start by talking about, you know, your approach to performance, maybe even how you got into BDSM through feminism. This was a kind of a feminist approach to BDSM, and how you met Bob Flanagan.
Well, definitely. I was getting a master's degree in psychology at Cal State Northridge, and I became associated with a group of women professors there. It was called Socialist Feminist Network, and I was just recently divorced, pretty naive about everything, and I learned about feminism from them, and they were just smart women, intelligent, funny, everything. And then one of them said to me, "Don't you realize that you're sleeping with the enemy?" So I thought about that. And so I was open at that point. I wanted a male partner. But I wanted somebody that was very different. And Bob came into my life like a miracle on Halloween. And we were both dead characters. And somehow, I mean, he was a character from Dawn of the Dead. I was Jane Mansfield. And our eyes met. It was like one of those things in a movie, but it was real. And I had no idea what he was into SM. We didn't talk about that first night. And, but I liked him because he was a poet and he was funny and he was younger. My husband was like 11 years older than me, and Bob was 11 years younger than me. And then he told me, like, on our first date that he was submissive. I said, "What does that mean?" He said, "It means I want to take care of you. I want to cook for you, clean for you, do whatever you say, pick up after your children, wash your windows." I said, "Fine, you're in." So it wasn't so much the sex as it gave me an opportunity to live out my fantasy of what life would be if I wasn't just another Encino housewife. You know, it didn't start out as an artist. It didn't at all. That came later, a little bit later.
Right. And I think that, you know, one of the things that's actually so remarkable about how you got into performance is where you were coming from. You know, you were, so talk about that in relationship to sort of breaking away from some of those, you know, heteronormative confines.
Right. Well, Bob was really talented. He was a wonderful poet. He was also a painter, and he was funny. He had a natural humor. I mean, I think the thing I loved about him the most in the beginning, for sure, was his sense of humor. I tend to be a more depressive kind of a person, but he made me laugh. And at Beyond Baroque, because he was a poet there, very important literary center. They had a thing in 1981. That's a year after we got together. Poets doing art, and we had been doing SM things privately, of course, but we did this performance where he stood in, wasn't naked. He had a little underwear on, and he had a hood over his head, and he was reading poetry that he made up. And we had all this food, and I kept on throwing food all over him until he was covered with food, and he became a sculpture. And that was our very first piece that we did. And it wasn't as if we were artists, we were poets. So he was a poet doing performance. But I had fun doing it. He had fun doing it. And that sort of started it off. That was our very first thing. And then we joined a club, an SM club. And one of the things we did there was we taught other people how to do different SM things, how to whip somebody safely, how to put clothespins on them, many, many things. So we did our first things privately to only people who were involved in our club. And it wasn't until later, I think Club Fuck had a big part of it, because we did a performance at Olio the year before Club Fuck started, where we brought in S&M things, art things, slides, music. You know, we sort of brought it all together. And that was 1989, I think that was. So it just sort of grew. We never said, "Oh, we're going to be artists. We're going to be performance artists. We just didn't. It was just something that grew out of our, who we were as people, So it was more for fun and for education than anything else. And our career just sort of blew up. Sort of amazing, really, because neither one of us had gone to art school at that point, but people kept on asking us to do things, and so we just did them. We always said yes, and we always, because he was much more of an exhibitionist than I was, and that's what I wanted it to be that way, because I thought he was such a talented, smart person and funny. The world should know about him, and I thought he was going to die in 2 years, because that's what he thought, he was going to die, but he didn't, so so it just sort of happened naturally in a very, very strange way, but I think people were interested in those days. I think there was a more openness to things that were sort of weird, the punk music was going on, and things were much more experimental, I think. It was a very exciting time to be doing these things.
Yeah, and I think that really, it gets to this question of, again, how you not only, brought together some of these underground and sexual subcultural worlds with the quote unquote art world. I mean, you said that you never, you didn't get into it for popularity or fame. This was something that, you were doing,
right,
and that you were invested in, and then
right.
It became an art world phenomenon. And then,
yeah.
But again, some of the radicalizations of, I think the spaces are really, really important to think about, especially with something like visiting hours, or some of the more recent performances that are in hotel rooms, where you're really blurring the boundaries between underground sexual subcultural space,
Right.
and things like the hospital space, the gallery space,
Right.
the
Well,
hotel room.
yeah. Well, the thing was, Bob was a sick person. And back in those days, in the early 80s, if you were sick, because AIDS was happening too, and some people thought Bob had AIDS because he coughed and he was very skinny, and many of our friends were dying, and but we both felt that it was important to not be ashamed of who you are, and and make your limitations become an asset. And that's what we did. And Bob was brilliant at that. And for me, it was more, I wanted to change the world. I did. I wanted to have women become more dominant, and that not to be something to be ashamed of, but to be proud of it, and to champion it. And Bob was the perfect partner for that, because yes, he was submissive as sexually and that kind of thing, but we were equal partners in everything. I mean, we made decisions together, and whatever it was, we did it all on our own, which was really interesting. We didn't have the support of the art world for a very long time, but I think research was very important, and they interviewed me for the research book, Modern Primitives, which was a very seminal book on bringing that underground into the mainstream. But in that book, there's many of my photographs are in that book. And they interview me. Bob is not interviewed in that book. I am. And the only mention I have of Bob is, oh, my slave Bob. His last name wasn't even in the book. I think that's, also because it wasn't about becoming famous. It really wasn't. And when it happened, we were always excited. And when we were asked to do things, and now it's so interesting, because our whole career, all this time I've done things, I've never filled out an application and said, oh, I want to do this. I've never done that ever. And in fact, the 2 times I've done it, I was turned down. So I sort of like the idea that things happened because they were meant to happen, and people were interested in what we were doing. What we were doing was interesting enough. So, it was a fabulous time. I miss it a lot. And then, of course, when I got together with Martin was like a dream coming true, there was this beautiful young man, and I mean, he was like the incarnation of Bob to me. And, even though our relationship is not sexual, I do many of the same things with Martin that I did with Bob, you know. And Martin is just, and he's not submissive at all in his real life, but we again have that certain chemistry that it just works with us. I don't know how that happened. It just did. Again, I feel that some of this happens is like not magical, but it's like we let things happen. And I live my life that way, and it's not always so good, but that's how I sort of live my life. I like to be, if something interesting happens, I like to say yes to it rather than no.
Yeah, and I think a lot of what you're saying also, and for those who sort of are less familiar, of course, Sheree and Bob had a full-time mistress-slave relationship, 24 hours. This wasn't
Right.
just, this is all day, every day for the entire 16 years that
Right.
they were together.
Yeah.
And the whole time, it's dominant woman, submissive man, but also, we're talking about minority embodiment in relationship to the non-able body, right?
Exactly.
When we're thinking about Bob. But I think this also gets to, thinking about, some of the what went on with, wanting to do this book is this idea that the book is a feminist project. A lot of people know about you and Bob, but there's been less attention to you in relationship to Bob as a collaborator and as somebody who, as you say in the interview with Tina Takemoto, the thing that people don't know is that Bob was my invention.
Right. Well,
And
Bob
then,
Bob would have been happy to just be my
right.
slave. But remember, when we got together, I thought he was going to die. I mean, I didn't expect him to live 16 years, and he didn't expect that. And I knew how talented he was in so many areas, and I wanted him to be the star. I'm a mother. I'm a Jewish mother. I'm a Jewish grandmother. Some things I may be weird, but so my feelings for him were somewhat, I mean, it was sexual, very sexual, but it was also maternal. And when I was behind the scenes, which I like to be behind the scenes, I got the pride, and this is very retro, the pride of a mother seeing her child being successful. So I had a lot of those feelings. You there? Oh, I'm seeing pictures.
Yes, sorry, I was just sharing the, I'm simultaneously trying to share images from the ebook right now.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. And I think that, so much of what you're talking about is, gets us to think about the importance, the sort of feminist importance of thinking about collaborative work, but also, who gets left out of those histories. And, Rated RX is very much about trying to correct the
Right.
assumption that all of this work is just Bob, and that, and that you stopped working after Bob died, which is obviously not at all the case.
Well, I had a very terrible back injury. I was faced with many deaths. My mother died first, then Bob died, then my first husband died, and then my father died. Within like a 2-year period, I lost my whole support system, and I was very floundering. And I'm not. I don't even remember when I got together with Martin. Well, anyway, but Martin revitalized everything. Martin revitalized everything, and it was sort of like a whole second career. And in that sense, I was much more equal with Martin, even though our roles and what we do, he was submissive to me, but it was very much more. We were two equals as artists. And I didn't. I sort of feel like Martin's grandmother a little bit, I got to admit it. And I'm happy when he does well. That pleases me so much, you know. So I am a feminist. I definitely am. I believe that women, I mean, all the things that are happening with women, I think are really, really important. I remember we would give lectures at this Orange Coast College to like 18, 19-year-old girls, in the class, in a human sexuality class. And I would tell all these girls, listen, you have to lock up your boyfriend's penis. Don't let them be out. If they want to have sex with you, then you have the key. I mean, I was telling them all these radical ideas to these Orange Coast girls because I believed in that. I really believe that unless women can take control of men's sexuality, they're going to be in trouble. They're going to get pregnant when they don't want to be. They're going to get raped or whatever, But it didn't work. Unfortunately, all my proselytizing about female domination, I don't think really took hold. But I tried. I tried very hard.
Well, we can't do everything, right? You do our part. But yeah, I mean, I think, and after Bob died, and there are images, again, you took, images of both your mom and Bob after they died, and they're in the book. I can share them right now, but I was interested in actually sharing the first piece you did after Bob died, which was Bobaloon. And I don't know if you want to talk, I'm going to share it right now. I don't know if you want to talk about the sort of, double standard that went around that, because that was shown in Tokyo. Let me go ahead and show.
Yeah, it was such a hit in Tokyo. I really thought I'm going to be an art star now, really. Because Bob had the idea, the original idea. There he is, 20 feet tall, all paid for by the Japanese government. It was a riot. It caused they had magazine articles about me and everything else, but it was, it was a really fun project to do. It came from a sketch that Bob had done, making his penis really big, and then I turned it into this 20-foot statue. But then when I came back to LA, like nobody cared, like it didn't matter, and I thought it was a very important piece, international. So I was very disappointed, I think, in the reception that I got back in Los Angeles. Oh, Bob's dead, so who cares about Sheree? And that was what the times were then. If you were the heterosexual partner of a male famous artist, you sort of got overlooked. I wasn't the only one that this happened to, and it was
right.
disappointing.
But with Bobaloon, I mean, and I'm just going to share this for a second. It's challenging to do this simultaneously, I got to say. With Bobaloon, of course, it was displayed in Japan, but then they made you cover it up. This is one of the images in the book.
Yeah, it was. That was there. When I was in Japan. The thing was fabricated in, I think, Taiwan, and I had about 6 assistants helping me. And when I gave the idea of it, I didn't tell them it had a 6-foot penis. I didn't tell them that. So they were sort of, they were Japanese and very polite, but then they got upset about it. So they said, you have to cover it up. So in one image, I had red cellophane, like a big condom. And they said, well, that we don't like that either. So they came up with the idea of a sumo diaper. So that was so this is my collaboration with the Japanese government. But we had about 10,000 people, I think, in the few days that it was up. It was an amazing event. And I love Japan. I love the Japanese people. And it was, but like I say, it was a little disappointing that it wasn't, no art gallery in LA was interested in showing it. Nobody was. And I was also dropped by a lot of my art friends who thought, well, Bob's dead, so who cares about Sheree? And again, this was sort of how things were, they just were. But, I'm resilient, and I got through a lot of stuff. And then when I got together with Martin, like I say, it was like a renaissance, and it just blossomed. and all the pieces that Bob couldn't do, he wanted to do. I did them with Martin, and those collaborations were brilliant, I think. Dust to Dust and at the One Institute, and then we did the viewing in England. I mean, those were very major that were conceived of by Bob, but then executed by myself and Martin and Rhiannon. So we took what Bob's idea was and we just made it into something spectacular. So
yeah, and for those who don't know, of course, what you're referring to is the Memento Mori Death Trilogy.
Right.
And
right.
this was to consist of the 3 different sort of casket-based performances,
Right.
Video Coffin,
Right.
Dust to Dust, which is also called Goodbye Bob, that Amelia Jones talks about, and other contributors talk about in book, and then the viewing, and only Video Coffin was realized before Bob died.
Video Coffin wasn't, because that's the one what he talks about it in one of his performances.
Yeah.
That what he wanted was when he died to have a video camera. Remember, this is now 1994, 95. We didn't have all that cool equipment to do it. And he wanted a video camera in the coffin, and then in a separate location, the person who wanted to see it would go into this room, and if they wanted to, they could turn on the viewing, and they would see Bob disintegrating in the coffin. I mean, I think that would have been an amazing piece, really, sort of transcending death, which we made fun of death all the time. I mean, I think that's how we got through the fact of his illness. And he never lost his sense of humor. He never did. And I think that was one of the things I loved about him the most, that he always could I have problems with depression, but he always made me laugh. He could always make me laugh, So, it's weird now. It's different. I mean, Martin and I were planning to do another piece. Hopefully Martin will talk about it, where he had all these coffins, and I was going to go to England and be part of that in England. And of course, we can't do that. So, and times are different now. I don't think they're open to some of the wild things that we did then. I don't think the world is as open to that kind of art that we did. I think the world is more closed-minded now, I think, in many ways, Anyway, that's my old lady talking.
Well, I'd like us to open it up to the panel in a sec, right now, if you would, because I'd like us to talk more about this question of reperformance. Really this idea that you're performing some of the ideas that you had with Bob, but also really giving a renewed sense of what this means in relationship to your own performance history, as well as those of your collaborators.
Right.
So I don't know if folks want to jump in. Rhiannon and Martin, you were both very instrumental in some of these performances, obviously as collaborators. I don't know if you want to say anything about those.
Yeah, one of the things that was a major concern for me creatively was like, how do you carry this kind of information forward into art making, right? And I had been a professional dominatrix for most of my adult life, and there were some things I knew from the community, and I of course learned a lot more from Sheree. One of the things that I do mention in the book is that working on the CF body in that capacity is very different than working on any other body I have ever handled. And as a professional, you work with thousands of people over the course of your career. And so the art making aspect of that as well, and like, how do we do this in terms of things like risk management, going through those experiences, I think was really valuable in terms of preserving the medium, which was a major concern for me. You can't write all of this down. There's just no way.
I guess you know, my first experience, and probably loads of you have heard me tell this story a million times before, of first encountering Sheree and Bob's work. I don't know if Amelia's heard this actually, but it was when I was 18, flicking through a book which Amelia edited with Tracy Waugh called The Artist's Body. And I was just flicking through, and this image of Bob's scrotum sewn up and nailed to a plank of wood, you know, and I kind of screamed, "Oh my God, what is this?" You know, I was 18 years old. I had no idea about performance art at the time. I just found this book in the library. And then I read the description. It said something like Bob Flanagan was an artist who collaborated with his partner and dominatrix Sheree Rose to make work about cystic fibrosis. And then my heart stopped because I have cystic fibrosis. And one of the peculiarities of the disease is that you're not supposed to be in the same room as anyone else with the illness. So this sense where you have no community of other people with the illness. Then all of a sudden, it was almost, I mean, I'm sure I'm romanticizing a little bit, but when I look back, it feels like it was that moment where I went, oh my God, actually art and performance is a place where these things can be explored. And then in a way, Sheree and Bob were a ghost that followed me as I started to develop my own practice. Every time I performed, people would say, "Oh, you have cystic fibrosis? Yeah, yeah. Do you know about Bob Flanagan?" "Yeah, I know about Bob Flanagan." "Oh, do you know about Bob Flanagan?" "I know about Bob fucking Flanagan. Yes." And then it was when Ron Athey was living in London. Maybe Ron's here. And he said, "Well, do something about it, address it somehow." And that's it. He said, "Just reach out to Sheree." And that was probably about 2009 when I got in touch with Sheree. And we talked a little bit on the phone and online. And then 2011, we finally made a piece of work together in London where I had a little commission. I managed to bring Sheree over. And then we made a kind of recreation of the original work was a video work, and we did a kind of live performance of it. The original work was 100 Reasons. That was Sheree, Bob, and Mike Kelly. And we did a kind of live re-performance of that. And at the time, I thought it was just going to be a one-off performance about addressing that legacy and trying to think about those histories of art and illness and the ways in which Bob and Sheree were kind of so central for that practice and that genealogy of making. But Sheree and I just, sparked. And so now for almost 10 years, we've made a piece of work every year. At least one piece, sometimes two pieces a year.
I want to share an image from the viewing. It's just from the raw footage that Rhiannon was nice enough to supply that I did a still from. Hold on one sec here. And I think this is something that, again, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about this. This is from the 2016 durational performance. Rhiannon, Martin, do you want to, or Sheree, you want to talk about this?
Somebody else talk about it.
Martin actually did most of the planning for this one, so he's probably the best person to talk about it.
Yeah, well, what happened is the year before I came over to LA and I had a residency at One Archives for 6 weeks, where Sheree and I think it's when maybe Sheree had just donated her archive to One, and the idea was that we'd go through the archive and we'd make a piece of work in response to it at the end. But what sort of started to emerge for us was the idea of these two missing pieces from the archive, the two unrealized performances from the Death Trilogy. And so at the end of that, we made a reimagining of Dust to Dust at the end of that residency. And then the following year, we managed to get a commission in London from Dada Fest in Liverpool, which is a disability arts festival, to do a version or an imagining of the viewing, which of course was the posthumous piece that Sheree was describing earlier. So of course I'm still alive. We had to rethink what that would be. And Sheree had this idea of the kind of CCTV camera, that I'd be in the coffin, spectators were in a different space, they would enter in, it was live, so we were in a room next to them performing for 24 hours where I stayed in this coffin, and at various times, I think maybe every hour, Sheree and Rhiannon would enter the space and do something to my body. So it was a kind of process that built up over the 24 hours. There was one really funny moment where that was described to me by people that came to see it, that they were in this room watching the CCTV footage, but kind of unaware where we are. And there was a point where they did something to me and I let out this scream, and they could hear it through the walls. So they were just, oh, okay, they're in the building. They're here. So the importance was that it was live, but that they were kind of just watching the process at a distance to us.
I flogged a set of clothespins off of you.
And some of these were obviously, you know, things that you had done with Bob, Sheree, yes, that were sort of performed with Martin. And again, this idea that Martin is this kind of, how we think about Martin as this kind of resurrected figure, if you will, as you've talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a real, you know, well, Martin has a great sense of humor like Bob. And I don't, maybe it's people with CF because they have a sense of mortality that most of us don't have. I mean, they have Martin did an amazing piece when he turned 30, because they said most people with CF don't live past 30. So living with that, I think, gives you a much more in-depth feeling about the meaning of life and what are you going to do with the time that you have. And a lot of the performances that Bob and I did were, even if they weren't actually done for audiences, that we did 24-hour S&M performances just for the two of us. And then Martin was doing durational performances. And I think the idea is to slow down time and to become very aware of every minute, every hour. And it does something to you. And we've done, Martin, how many 24-hour pieces have we done together now? We've done quite a few, I think. Three of them?
Yeah, I think 3 24-hour pieces and 12-hour.
And Martin was doing, and before Martin knew me, he was doing durational pieces, 9 hours. And our first collaboration after the 100 Reasons was a 9-hour performance that we did. And I learned to love those durational performances because everything just changes in there, you know. And also we both of us love improvisational, and which Bob was amazing as a improvisational actor. He was a part of the Groundlings, which was a very important, I don't know if it still is, comedy troupe in Los Angeles, where it's all about improvisation. And it's that having that meeting life, whatever happens, you don't say no to it. You can alter it, you can fool around with it, but you welcome it, whatever it is, you accept it. And I think it's that acceptance of life. I'm having a hard time now with this virus thing. I'm having a hard time accepting it being at home, but you sort of have to. You sort of have to, and you also have to have a sense of humor about it. You can't be too serious all the time, or you'll go crazy. You know, you have to see it as sort of a human comedy in a way. That's not original, but I think that Martin has, and I think our performances and Bob's performances, even though they were with blood and with doing weird things and scalpels and all that, but there was a sense of loving life. It was never like these were not depressing pieces at all. They were very life-affirming pieces, I think, anyway, you know? You think so, Martin? I think so.
Yeah, I think, you know, I think the work is as much about sort of survival as it is about death, and it's about that kind of relationship. It's mortality, but I think that's the thing about endurance as well, that it feels to me that it speaks something towards ongoing and attempts to continue going, and then our catchphrase, keep breathing, which we always say in our works.
Yeah, keep breathing. Definitely. Does anybody else want to talk?
Yeah, let's get some other folks from the panel. The one thing I just hope that we can also address here is just this kind of idea of the archive and archival practice, and the fact that, you know, especially with something like Dust to Dust, that was also called Goodbye Bob, as Amelia Jones talks about in her essay in the book, is, you know, performing a gap in the archive, again, those unrealized performances at the archive. And, you know, Dust to Dust / Goodbye Bob was performed at the One archives. So I don't know if Amelia or other folks want to jump in.
Yeah, I actually had a question that I've never really talked through with you, Sheree, about photography. Like, because you started as a photographer, and
Right.
one of the amazing things about every performance I've seen with you and Bob and you and Martin is the use of photography and video.
Mm-hmm.
So for those who didn't see the one performance, you have a coffin, you have little confetti-sized photographs of Bob, which are your photographs, which are being kind of sprinkled around. Can you talk a little bit about what that means for you as a photographer or someone who used to be primarily a photographer?
Yeah. Well, I started off really documenting my family. I had two young children, and like any other mother, you take photographs of your kids. And then when I got together with Bob, and I thought he was going to die in 2 years, I thought to myself, I'm just going to document everything that he does. And he did a lot of interesting things. So photography was very much a part of what I wanted to do. I had the very strong idea. I wanted to preserve Bob after he died. I wanted to have mementos of him, and what better way than photographs. And I don't know. I don't really do much photography anymore. My life is very different now. But I had that. But of course, he lived for 16 years, so it became something that was like a fetish in a way. My fetish was taking photographs of Bob, wherever he was, whatever he was doing, and he was always doing something interesting. So it was a part of wanting to preserve who Bob was, and I thought he was going to die, so I wanted the memories of him to be something I could look at and remember.
So much of visiting hours, like as I remember it, was photographic. There was that whole wall.
Yeah, the wall of pain. Yeah, these
Yeah.
are things we did on our own. Many of those things we just did because we were having fun with each other. We didn't do it really. Most of the stuff we really didn't do, but when they asked us to do, we were very surprised. We didn't put any application in. The Santa Monica Museum of Art just asked us to do something. And so it just that was like amazing work. And because it combined our SM practices, being a child, um, just everything came together. And Bob was sort of like the high priest in his hospital bed, and people would come in and talk to him. It was an amazing show. It really was. And then it went over to New York, and
Yeah.
so photography has always been a big part of it, because I wanted everyone to remember Bob. I didn't want him to be forgotten, So I did photograph him for 16 years, including his death, including that. I didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That show was so amazing in so many ways, the visiting hours, but just in terms of that hinge between, the live body and the photographic body, it was like so ahead of its time.
Yeah, but I don't know. We never thought the thing is, I didn't go to art school until the year Bob died. We were, and Bob never went to art school, so we were really self-taught, and we had wonderful friends and collaborators like Jim Shaw and Mike Kelly, and that was our group. That was the people that we hung out with. So we were certainly influenced by those people who were amazing artists. And but even the collaboration with 100 Reasons, I mean, that started off because of I think it's in the book, I think, our 10th anniversary, and everybody in the art world came to that party. And I spanked Bob 100 times because Mike Kelly had already written this poem, but it had nothing to do with Bob, nothing to do with anything. It was names of paddles, of fraternity paddles. but we loved it, the idea of paddling. And so that was the first time it was done at this party, just for private people. But then Mike called us and said, you want to make a video out of it? And we said, yeah. So I had my friend who videoed it. And so I produced and directed it. And Mike read the poems, read the words, and I spanked Bob, and my friend videoed it. Very simple. No one subsidized that. But that piece has been shown all over the world. It's really famous. So, and I think it's very funny, actually, that it became such a famous thing.
I'm personally grateful to you for making fun of fraternities.
Yes, it was. And I've done it. I've done it everywhere, and people love it. I've done it at private parties. You know, when I was in India, I used to give people birthday spankings. So it has a half-life for sure. Although I haven't given anybody spankings recently. I think I'm retired from that pretty much.
Well, this great photo is by Judy. And so how does it feel to be photographed by another amazing photographer?
You know, I don't really like being photographed. I mean, again, I was like in the background, even in visiting hours when Bob would get hoisted up by his ankles. I was never, no one saw me do that. That was my idea, to go behind a wall and do it privately, so that he would be in the bed and all of a sudden he would rise up, you know. But I didn't want to be the star. That wasn't anything that I really wanted to be, you know. I wanted Bob to be the star, and he was.
I think you were visible for me. Maybe it's just because we were friends. I remember you.
Really? I was usually behind a wall, because the
idea. Impressive.
No, the idea was he'd be in the bed, people would be in there talking to him, and then he'd make a signal. We had a camera set up, and he would make a signal, and then I would start hoisting him up. But I was not in the room. I mean, maybe
I must have talked to you just before then.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But the idea was, and then he would have his hospital gown on, and as he went up to the ceiling, his hospital gown would fall off, and then he would be there dangling naked, you know.
Which is how we all feel every time we have to go to the hospital and wear one of those.
Exactly. I have a story that's not about art, but everybody knows who Francis Collins is. He's the head of the infectious diseases. He's doing a lot of stuff with the virus now. He's very famous, Francis Collins. Well, the year before Bob died, when he was in the visiting hours in Los Angeles, Francis Collins came in, met Bob, and was going to give Bob a double lung transplant. But they decided that his lungs were too far scarred. But every time I see Francis Collins now on television, I think about that and what might have happened if Bob had gotten a double lung transplant.
I was wondering if Judy would talk a little bit about the photographs.
Judy,
do you want to talk about attending some of the performances and
sure. I'm going to talk specifically about this 100 Reasons because, my practice of being a photographer, a documentary photographer, has really historically been really more street photography. And so with doing this, showing up at this 100 Reasons gallery event opening night, was one of the first events where I started to go to kind of more nighttime cultural events involving, transgressive practices and, the queer community. So I had, though, previously been to the Pose exhibit. I'm sorry, the one at Last Projects that happened previous to this. What's the exact name, Yetta?
Corpse Pose.
Corpse
Pose.
Pose, yes, I'm sorry, I had
Oh,
been
the
that.
corpse pose, yeah.
And then, you know, after this 100 Reasons, I had also been to the Do What You Want With Me exhibit on the West Side. But I mean, my own practice is typically when I get excited about something, it's especially nighttime events. And when I go to clubs, and I go with my camera, it's really hard for me, depending on the night, to take photographs because I kind of want to just dive into like, no, I want to dance. I'm going to see this band I really like, or I want to go to this, art exhibit I really like. And, kind of just absorb what's going on at the time. But because Sheree's a good friend of mine, and I had actually never seen the 100 Reasons photographs, I really had committed to myself that I wanted to take photos. So, I have 4 photos in the book, and this one, obviously, and some others outside, some people attending, some backstage that I may end up putting on a website in the near future. Sheree preparing for her performance here, getting a manicure by Grace, who is sitting here. There's one really hot, what I think is a hot photograph of just their feet. And so you see Grace's open-toed, painted nail shoes, foot in shoe, and Sheree's leather boot with fishnets on. But I had really committed for myself saying, I have to document this. And, I really didn't know what I was going to do with the photographs after I took them. I kind of don't really know what I'm going to do with my photographs typically after I go to a club night or I go to a scene. And mainly most of my photographic work for the past few years has been going to more queer culture or transgressive scene events as opposed to street photography. But I'm open to that still. But I don't know, I just felt comfortable. No one seemed to object that I was there with the camera. At least they didn't say anything, to me personally. So if you heard anything, just let me know. But, I really appreciate the opportunity to go in and do a little documentation of these photographs.
Well, also, it's wanted that for the cover, so it ended up being the cover.
Right.
So,
and wrapped around to the back. So.
And we have Grace memorialized in a small way.
Right. And I think Rhiannon is in the back, right? Is that you, Rhiannon, kind of back against the wall in the photograph, possibly as well? So,
Luka,
anyway, that's the way I do it.
Yeah, let's hear from Luka.
Yeah.
Luka, we haven't heard from you.
Video.
And your essay in the book is so important, I think, in terms of how we even think about archival practice, sort of what are the limits of even being able to work with the archive and
Well, thank you for that. So I won't really go into how I know Sheree or whatever, because it's in my chapter largely, and you can just buy the book. But what has always really struck me about her as interesting is, and which we haven't yet even really talked about all that much tonight, is that she was an incredibly prolific photographer and video artist, and not just of Bob, but of the entire LA poetry scene, such that just about every other year now, a book will come out of someone and she has the cover photograph of that person, be it Dennis Cooper or others. And she also made a lot of really interesting videos, some of which were released to the world, such as Needles and Pins, and many of which that weren't. And what I started to think about was that to date, most of this stuff is no longer with us except for in the archive. And if it's in the archive, it's oftentimes kind of in pieces. And I wanted to do two things. Basically, I started with the question of what could I learn about Sheree that I don't currently know if I ignored anyone that the so-called art world thinks matters. So when I looked at her video archive, I refused to look at Mike Kelly. He can go fuck himself. Didn't look at Dennis Cooper. Didn't look at Ron Athey. They're all great people, but just don't fucking care. And so I noticed that she had all of these videos of family dinners. And I noticed that there was a reference to an MFA thesis that was videotaped. So I started to just watch that stuff and unpack it. And as I was doing that, I was thinking about Sheree is a living archive and can give us information up until the point she passes. And then after that, it's just going to be a game to figure out what's there. So I realized that being given the opportunity to write a book chapter was an ability to play a game with archival politics, which is to say, it's not in the archive, but if Sheree says that this happened, I can then insert that into my chapter, which then inserts it into the imaginary within the archive. And what I mean by that, to be specific, is she made a movie called Needles and Pins, which fortunately is in the archive and explores piercing subculture with Jim Ward's studio. But she also made a documentary about the Nihilist Olympics, which is not there, a documentary about the Wobblies, which is not there, and several other projects. And so my goal was to kind of try to catalog as much of Sheree's work as could be assessed so that we could at least rhetorically point to it or ask what that work might have meant later. And then what I ended up focusing on was just her MFA thesis show. I regret that I didn't mention, I guess, in my chapter that in her first video diary, Sheree speculates on what it would mean to be an artist separate from Bob, and talks about her using her mom's last name, her mom's first name as her last name, Rose. And so at any rate, her MFA thesis show was called Leftovers, and it was part of a documentary that Sheree was making about her mom's cooking practice, specifically her cooking of chicken noodle soup or matzo ball soup. Sheree sort of uses both names interchangeably. And it was supposed to be a reenactment of their family dinner, but it was cut short because Sheree's mother died shortly before the event could happen. And so there's this recreation of her mother's soup, which is placed on an altar, on a stand, like a sculptural object, that's kind of a testimony to sort of the effective labor of her mother. And I thought the show was a really interesting stand-in, both for Sheree trying to work through and perform her private life, but also as a way of sort of drawing attention to all the effective labor that her mother had provided and which got completely ignored. Like her mother's life's work was this dinner table, was these food items, was the people there. And that in a way seemed like also a metaphor for, I think, Sheree's practice, which has oftentimes been creating the setting, the situation, and the circumstances for people to be together. And yet she oftentimes gets overlooked from that. And so I was trying to basically just kind of start a new conversation about her practice in this chapter. Sorry for chatting it up.
Oh, that's great.
Great. I think, should we start to take questions from the audience? There's so much we didn't get to. Obviously, this is just a very small slice of Sheree's career and of the book. Should we take questions from the audience? I don't know if, okay.
Are there? Questions?
We don't have any questions in the chat yet, but I've encouraged people to do so, I guess.
Oh, really? No.
Until then.
There's
No
always
questions.
amazing.
There's always questions.
questions.
I have a million more things that you know.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, if you want to talk a little bit about putting the book itself, together and bringing in these great contributors,
Okay.
I think people might be interested in that too.
I mean,
what made it in, what didn't make it in, what do you wish could have made it in if there had been more space, time?
Yeah, I mean, this is a feminist project because for me, I saw this is something that was sort of like happening in real time because I was attending the performances, not all of them. I couldn't go to, Liverpool. And I was going up for tenure at the time and working on my first book. So it was like I was attending some of the performances or a lot of them from 2013 through 2017 while writing, while thinking about the book. And Sheree and I had started to talk about this book back in 2013, Sheree?
At least, yeah. Yeah.
And then you came out to SDSU to do a talk. And then in 2014, the Rose Flanagan Papers went to the One Archives. But it was actually really, really disorganized, and it was actually really difficult to work with until archivist Cooper T. Mall, who was, a godsend for anybody doing archival research, because when I first went to the archive in 2014, right after Sheree had donated the collection, I didn't even know where, like, what I was like looking for. And then, going to the performances from 2013 through 2017, I was sort of, thinking about what the structure of the book might look like as an archival book after going to the performances. And then Sheree was with me for a lot of the archival trips. So for example, when we found Bob's last performance, the In My Room, contact sheet for that, and then one of the images of Bob's last performance. I did not know what that was, and then Sheree told me what that was from. So I really like this idea of, Sheree herself as this living archive. And, as far as like the structure of the book as an archival book, I mean, I try to kind of preserve and go against, work with the chaos of the archive. That's, scholars like Amelia Jones have talked about, Dominic Johnson have talked about this too. Also think about, what Subjectivities has called archives of feeling, more ephemeral kinds of ways that we document that are a little more difficult, to work with in a kind of a physical form. But there's a lot of thumbnails in the book is divided between words and images, and in the words section there are thumbnails that kind of point you to the images, but it's not meant to be this kind of excessively directed kind of thing. And that thumbnail thing, I can't take the credit for that. That was the design department at Ohio State University Press. But I think that it works really well to make it seem like have more of a performative element. So I don't know if other folks want to speak to some of those, or if there's other questions from the audience.
Can I jump in with a question? Kind of bringing in one of the questions in the chat. And also, you've talked, especially with Amelia, about this idea of re-performance, but also as you're thinking about the archive, I'm also imagining a kind of mediation of the archive, and not just Anne Speckovich's work, but something like Jose Muñoz's work on, Ray Johnson and Jill Johnston, and these kinds of networks that appear when you're doing archival research, as you're seeing communities that have been in formation, and that those practices then get reflected in the way collections are categorized. And so there's a question from Marianne Davis I'm going to pose to you that I think relates to that. Marianne says, at a certain point of doing my own research in the archives, I felt a combination of bored and also invasive, that what I was reading, Bob's journals in particular, wasn't meant for me. How did others feel in exploring the Rose Flanagan archives and affect? Also very honored to be part of this conversation. XOXO. I'll leave that to you.
Marianne is actually a contributor to this volume and has just an absolutely gorgeous essay, and she's a poet and an academic. But I think, I don't know, Martin, do you want to, answer that question or speak to that question as somebody who's in the archives, but also collaborating with Sheree?
Sure, but I think Luka wanted to say something first, so maybe pass to them first.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to jump in and say the strangest thing for me was within Sheree's video archive are all these family dinners, but also you can watch her mother's death, among other things. And so I spent an incredible amount of time with Sheree and her family across time and space at the One Archives, just watching the struggles and, you know, family drama unfold. And then I finished my book chapter, and probably, let's say 6 weeks later, unless I'm getting wrong on the time, Sheree had a heart attack and ended up in the hospital. And I ended up being there for much of that time, helping her in the hospital and chatting with her family. And it was very strange to have been a specter on the wall at her mother's death or something. And so I was not there. I did not feel those things, but I remember everything better than everyone in that room in a certain way. And so I'm now sitting in the hospital or privy to these fights in which I am both a participant and just some random fucking person that's watched way too many family films. And one other moment was I showed a video of Sheree and Jane together on a Christmas party. And I remember Sheree just being like, "This is so boring. How did you watch this?" Or, "Oh my God, I can't believe I did that. You know, don't show this to anyone." And, you know, it'd be like, "Sheree, it's in the archive," you know? So it's a very strange feeling, to answer your question, Mary.
Yeah, there's, you know, that was pretty beautiful, Luka, and I definitely felt something there arriving into the archive in 2015, whereas as Yetta had said, was completely unorganized at that point, which is like January 2015 or December 2014, maybe, when I first arrived in it. And I remember we would just go in the room and take a box, take it to another room, and Sheree and I would just sit for hours taking out, they were all slides, you know, the kind of old fashioned slides, which we would use a light box to look at. So we would take these thousands of slides and spend hours sort of looking at them, and sitting there speaking with Sheree did something else to it. So you're experiencing it with her as she kind of narrated these people that have come in and out of her lives at different points, and kind of seeing her remember these different things that have happened to her and these experiences, some of them art-based, some of them kind of outside of art. And that was a really beautiful thing, really moving as well, to see the ways in which art and life just collide in their practices, and that the archive became this kind of testimony to a life which was an artwork, and a life which held the art as well. And it was very beautiful, very moving, you know, and there's something kind of poetic about that, seeing a kind of life's work in these boxes. Yeah, so it was a kind of overwhelming feeling of going through it, and a beautiful and moving feeling going through it.
Can I pose another question? We have lots of questions from the audience, and I think this one builds on the conversation. It's from Lee Ashcroft. And Lee,
oh, yeah, Lee.
Hi, Lee. Everyone's happy you're here. And Lee says, I worked with Sheree, Rhiannon, and Martin at a workshop in Brighton a few years ago, and it was one of the most incredible, transformative weekends of my life. So apart from saying thank you, I want to ask what they get out of working with new people and teaching these skills, both within an SM context and in our context. And then Lee says, I hope this question makes sense. It's 2:08 and I am somewhat sleep deprived. I think that
Oh, well, yeah. I love teaching and having other people, other artists. You know, it was wonderful experience for all of us, I think. And again, just to expand what's possible to do in the name of art. You know, ordinarily you'd think, no, sticking needles in people is an art, but as Martin well knows, you can very much put needles in people's bodies and make it into art. So it was a wonderful experience for all of us. I think we all really loved it as well. It was Yeah, well, I like to teach anyway, and Martin is a teacher, and Rhiannon is a teacher. We're all teachers as well as artists. So it was, and it was just, yeah, it was great. Lee, I think about you a lot. I love to see what you're doing now, but I'm not in England, so, but we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, that was such an amazing experience to be able to do that, because there aren't a lot of venues that support that kind of learning. And so being able to work in the UK to do that was incredible. I think liability-wise, teaching a lot of more extreme paint art practices is not really feasible in the United States. So that was a really unique opportunity, and I am so grateful also to Live Art Development Agency for supporting that for everyone as well. And really my, interest in this practice in the archive, right, is preserving it for the community and really disseminating like how you do these practices in a risk managed, safe, consensual, and healthy way. And in so many ways, all of this is just about that for me, that was kind of the, what I was in this to be doing when we got there.
Yeah. More questions?
Yeah, we have tons of questions that are pouring in, so and any panels can see them as well and decide to answer. I think there's maybe another one.
There's questions about music and music subcultures, the work with Nine Inch Nails and Godflesh. And I mean, that's another thing that I think is really less talked about seriously in relationship to your work, is that it extended out to all of these different, contexts.
We were just, I don't know, maybe because we had so many friends who were so talented, and John Reese was a friend of ours, and he knew Trent Reznor before Trent was that famous. It was pretty famous, but he had this song, and since John Reese was a friend of ours, he knew we were into S&M, and we had this idea of having this torture chair, and John Reese just went with it, and it was the most exciting, wonderful video shoot we've ever done. It was a big hit on MTV. They actually showed it on MTV. It wasn't in color. The actual video, Happiness and Slavery, was black and white. But from there, we also, John Reese did another video with Danzig, another underground band. And we did a wonderful video with them. I got all my SM friends to do it. And SM people are really wonderful. They're exhibitionists. They love to show off what they're doing. So it was a great, and the song was fantastic. And the last one we did was when we were in New York. The band Godflesh came to see us in the show, and in the show they saw me pulling Bob up to the ceiling. So they asked us to be in their video, and in that video, I recreate what I did in the art piece in their music video. So again, it was just this wonderful flow of people and ideas, and we could do anything, and everything was possible. I think it was a very, very special time, and I'm very happy I was able to be part of that. I just, all those things were just wonderful. Great memories from all, and it's great art. I think all those videos, I think, were really, there's a still from that. And this is what I did behind the scenes in the show, but not in the wedding. I didn't have a wedding dress, but for this I had my wedding dress. But I don't know if you can even find those videos anymore. Crush My Soul, and It's Coming Down, and Happiness and Slavery.
There were the uncensored ones were banned, and then obviously like the Danzig one, and then the Godflesh one was not as explicit, but the Danzig and the Nine Inch Nails were banned.
But the nine Happiness and Slavery played on MTV. It actually played on MTV for a while. It really did, and I think Trent Reznor, when we went to a show or something with what Trent was doing in LA, and people thought Bob was Trent. So after that, Trent starred in all his own videos.
Sheree, I have an amazing pre-archival memory.
Yes.
Because I knew you both, before you were in archive, and sitting on the couch in kind of a grotty apartment on a hill in Silver Lake or Echo Park. What apartment was that?
I lived in Echo Park. We lived in
Yeah,
Echo Park.
and watching, Bob was showing me all these VHS tapes, and one of them was the 9 Inch Nails.
Oh,
And
really?
I was like so naive. I was looking at it like,
No, but you,
my God, is it really being churned by a meat grinder? What's going on here?
but you were there when I did this. We did the performance of the against the abortion with Randall Terry. Remember
Absolutely,
that
yeah.
one? That was one of the few shows that I was actually featured, because I was the one who put the hooks in it. I think it was the first show you ever saw us do. It was an early show. It was an anti, it was in favor of abortion rights, and it was against Randall Terry, who was this creepy guy, and Bob was acted out Randall Terry.
Operation Rescue, that was his organization.
Oh yeah, it was, but we did this. I think it was at Lace.
Yes, it was at Lace. It was called Issues of Choice, I think.
Yeah, yeah. You remember I don't remember the names of anything. But
there's a great photograph of Bob with this like ridiculous wig.
Yeah, and he would say the words that Randall Terry. So all our work, especially that early work, was very political. It was something that we, that I don't know that Bob. I mean, of course, Bob believed in it, but I was the one who wanted all these feminist ideas to come out, because a part of my liking Bob and wanting to do these things was for that reason, wanting to change the structure and how women and men, related to each other. And so it was very political. And he even writes that in his poem. For Sheree, it was political more than anything else. And it was. I mean, it was sexy too, of course. I don't want to say it wasn't. But the political aspect of it was very important to me. Very important.
We need more politics now.
The illegal operation too. Sorry.
Yeah.
I was saying.
That was Rhiannon. That was Rhiannon. We should talk about that piece, which almost got us in so much trouble. Talk about it, Rhiannon.
Illegal operation. Yeah, I had to. People on my graduate committee bailed when I started trying to bring this into the sphere. And ultimately CSULB was pretty supportive, but we had to jump through a lot of risk management hoops that had never happened before with that one. I think Chris Miles put it very succinctly when he said, to pull this off, you're going to have to go to people whose job is usually to make sure the table saw is locked and say, I'm going to pull a rabbit out of my vagina with an ensemble cast. How do we make this happen, right? So, I mean, I think it was interesting because it was challenging, and it was also really important for me to do it there because Westboro Baptist Church puts up these enormous triggering photos of aborted fetuses in the common areas, intentionally trying to trigger students. There's a whole bizarre financial model that goes with that as well, but legally speaking, there's nothing the school can do to stop them. So this was, definitely about what happens, and the Trump administration abortion restrictions were really starting to take effect during that moment. And it was something that we really needed to discuss on a performance level. And I think that piece is really interesting. I was just thinking about in terms of Sheree's production overall in collaboration, because it was one of the few pieces that you were involved in that had no men in it. Right, when you're performing with Bob and you're performing with Martin, there's a cis male body. But this was the one that was mostly, I think it was strictly a cis female ensemble. We had some men documenting, but other than that, it was all women who were doing this. And I think that has a very different dialogue that goes with it, and a very different pitch that I think is really interesting. Yeah. But I mean, this piece was incredibly political, and it was a long fight to really pull it off.
And I remember your dean said it was the best thing she ever saw. Remember that?
Cyrus Jeanette Parker. Yeah.
Yeah.
She was incredibly supportive. And that was the thing, we had people like Karen Kleinfelder, who were in the administration who were willing to take that risk. And that's a big ask. And now that I'm faculty there, I see it, and from the other side of this discussion, and it is a really big ask. And I'm so grateful that the people who supported us, who did this, right, were willing to trust us with this content ultimately.
Right. Well, there was no real blood. There was nothing. It was all. This was the most theatrical piece I think I ever did. It was all. But it was beautiful. It was an amazing piece. But
it was.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
No, you're good. Go ahead.
No, I think it was an interesting mechanism to look at because this was very theatrical. And also it was not mediated. And I think those two things too are kind of unusual. And that I think may have been kind of what, our collaboration really kind of evolved, was that particular aesthetic. And it is very different from, what we make with Martin, and from what you made with Martin, and from what you made with Bob.
Yeah, true. I did the corpse pose. Usually I would do it, I was a doctor, and I would have the body completely encased in plastic, and then I would cut out the plastic. And most of the time it was men, but in India, I did it with Rocio, a very wonderful artist, and she agreed to be my patient. And so I did cut out everything on her body, and it was very different working on a female body rather than a male body. But it was fun both ways. I enjoy both doing it with both men and women. It's fun to do. I love to play doctor.
There is a question in the chat about how you would feel about being a dental assistant. There's so many questions in the chat, and I think
it says, if Bob was a dentist, would you be a dental assistant? Is it that one?
I don't like dentists. I like doctors. I don't like dentists, so I don't know.
I think that's fair. Probably we all.
So this was the prep table that Yetta's pulled up. This was the prop equipment table that we left, also in a slightly different state, for people to look at after we had done the performance. So a lot of these things were used during the performance, and some of them were just there to kind of incite that what if anxiety in the audience.
Yeah. Well, I think when the medical things, when you have CF and you're a masochist, you sort of blend the idea of medical procedures as sexy. And I think Martin will agree with that as well. And we would always have tables, like all of Martin in our performances, we would always have a table full of all the equipment. And our last performance, Martin, you want to talk about that a little bit? We did what did we do it in Regina, Canada? Talk about that one we did with Jeffrey Valance.
Yeah, so we've been working with this idea of a zombie for a little while, or that's something I've been really sort of obsessed with for a few years. Or I've been thinking about the zombie as a way of like understanding mortality when you surpass your life expectancy. So I sort of thought about this idea of zombie time as a kind of shadow temporality, which you enter into when you live longer than expected. And Sheree and I have been playing with this idea of the zombie for a little while, and so we made a work in Regina, which was called We Walked with Zombies Down the Primrose Path, with Sheree Rose, Martin O'Brien, and the ghost of Bob Flanagan. And the idea is that we both began in graves, and we emerged in this kind of DIY B-movie style zombie makeup. And then we had our table with all the equipment, and over a series of a couple of hours, we started to recreate different performances that we'd done, different things that Sheree had done with Bob, in these kind of zombie guises. And we became these kind of zombie versions of ourselves, as if we'd died and we were kind of returning to these things, figuring out how we use these materials again, going back over old things, talking as we did it, speaking to the audience, talking through things we did. And we had Jeffrey Valance there, who was the kind of sorcerer in a way, I guess, wasn't he? He had the kind of tacky wizard outfit. He had a tacky wizard outfit on. He kind of resurrected us. It was you know, kind of tongue in cheek, and it was this thing of like memory. It was a kind of memories, and Sheree would kind of talk through these different memories, and we would try to recreate them and reconstruct them as these sort of dead personas.
I think the whole idea of using death and medicine, especially now with the pandemic, when everybody is worried about their health. Doesn't matter if you have CF or you had a heart attack, everybody is in the same boat with this. Death could come at any time. And I think it's really, I think we're sort of prescient, Martin. I think that what we did, did we make it less scary? I don't know. But I think people could look at us and think, oh my God, they're sick, you know, they have these problems. But now I think everybody feels the same way, you know. So I don't know what that means in terms of art practice right now. I'm not really sure. And will you talk about what you were going to do, your piece that you were going to do that I was going to come and be part of? You got all the coffins?
I've got 9 coffins stacked up in my studio here in London, which hopefully a version of this is still going to happen, but the piece is called The Last Breath Society, and then in brackets, coffin. I also have to say coffin as in, and then coffin as in the thing that you're buried in. So my accent, it just sounds the same. And this was something that I developed before the pandemic started. The idea was thinking about a bringing together of people who are sick or thinking about death and dying in different ways to become a kind of society, semi-fictional society of people to come together. And it would take place at the ICA in London, which is Institute of Contemporary Arts. And it would be a durational performance using 9 coffins and sound recordings of coffin coming out of the coffins and a series of actions that take place around and in the coffins. But I'm rethinking it at the moment because that image of the coffin with the cough coming out of it just seems to speak to something completely differently now, and is starting to really like transform as an image. So I'm trying to redevelop it to happen next year, which it may be a 8 or 9 day performance where I perform each day in the space, but I invite other artists to contribute videos that become part of a kind of installation. A very limited audience coming in, maybe 1 or 2 at a time, to sort of experience the work and see it, and to try and think about what that image of the coffin and the sound of the cough is sort of doing culturally now.
I think Bob would love it. That's all I can say. He would love it.
Can I put a question to you that really speaks to the kind of sense of overwhelm that we're all feeling around bodies and illness and cumulative death? And it's from Beth Freeman. And she says, this is a very personal question for Sheree, I guess, but I was struck both in Sick and in the book with the moment that Bob says, and then you say in the book that Bob can't be your submissive anymore because he has to submit to death, or kind of something to that effect. And Beth says, that broke my heart. It made me wonder what that left you in terms of a Dom identity that was so connected to Bob. How does one move over for death, or is that the point in the end?
Yeah, well, death was always with us, you know. It never left our consciousness ever. But you know, and we before he died, we were actually went to the hospital and we talked about what was going to happen, and we went down to this room where they take you after you die, and I was going to be alone with Bob, which I was, and I did a performance on Bob after he was dead. We had talked about this, and got me in trouble. I think people thought I had murdered Bob. Actually, I had police come to my house and wanting to know, how did Bob die? So even to the very end, you know, he couldn't be as submissive to me because he was too ill. But we still wanted that connection, and I think it lasted even after his death. You know, I think it really did. And you know, everybody has to give up at some point, and he lasted till he was, you know, 43 years old, which was pretty. Yeah. And I photographed him. We bathed him and we did prayers over him, arranged his body, and I cut him, and yeah, it was, till it was at the end, he still was submissive to me. I think he still was, even in death.
I think we might want to have a final question or so. And there is a question in the audience, an anonymous question. Sheree, you mentioned that you wanted to change the world in terms of women's positioning and expressions of sexuality. How do ableist ideologies play into this role? And I think kind of the question of ability and disability and archiving different forms of embodiment kind of comes out throughout this conversation. If maybe we could have Sheree and Yetta and others kind of chime in as a kind of closing gesture.
I'm not exactly sure what you're asking me.
The question is, how do ableist ideologies play a role in this? And this being that you wanted to change the world in terms of women's positioning and expressions of sexuality.
You mean ableist mean you don't have any disease or anything is that what you're talking? I'm not exactly sure what that is.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think a kind of a normalizing of non-disabled bodies, kind of privileging able-bodied people and experiences and identities.
Well, I don't think, I'm not sure. I mean, Bob certainly didn't do that, and Martin certainly. We and live art, there was an amazing artist who recently died, Catherine Arnelio, am I pronouncing her name right? Who was a woman who had, she was in a wheelchair. I mean, she was just an amazing artist. So, and there was I think one of the first things I did with Martin was at artists who were disabled. So, and I don't know that, now that I had a heart attack, I never really felt I was particularly able. I think I always felt I had some physical problems. So I'm not sure what, I'm sorry, I'm not getting it. What you what you're asking, I mean, certainly if you're white, you're privileged. And if you're able-bodied, you're privileged. That's just the way the world is. What are you going to do about that? I tried. Certainly I tried. And Bob made being sick sexy, and that was sort of forbidden before that, especially if you were a man. You never admitted you were sick or there was something wrong with you. So I think we did change the culture in that way. I think we did, but maybe I'm not answering the question. I'm not sure.
Well, I think, it's important not to also associate dominance with ableism. I think that's a really important thing to think of, because I think, Sheree, you were at that DomCon where Tara and Deanna taught the blind woman to pierce. Right? Yeah. I mean, it all can be accommodated if you really think through it strategically and have a good understanding of the mechanisms and safety protocols around BDSM.
Yeah. Yeah, we were always very careful. Everything we did in S&M, but not in art, but in S&M, very careful about, we used gloves and masks and all kinds of stuff way before it was fashionable to do it. Really, we did, I mean, very careful not to do anything, especially with blood or cutting or any of these more extreme SM activities. We had classes, we taught people how to do it safely. It was never just, oh, I'm going to cut you. So we were very careful about that, very cognizant of health and taking care of our bodies, even though we were doing weird things with them at the same time. I don't think I answered your question, though. I don't sure I know what you mean by it, because, I mean, after my heart attack, I don't feel like I'm in that category now. And I think most people feel that there might be in that category now. The whole idea of the perfect body and perfect health. I'm not sure what that even means anymore, if that's even a viable alternative. Now we're in this horrible pandemic. Who can say that now, I think the world has changed in many ways in terms of ableism, if that means being perfect in your body.
Well, ableism is obviously also a huge spectrum when we're talking about bodies and ability and so forth. But something that Sheree's always been very open about throughout her career has been her own struggles with sort of mental illness or a depressive attitude. And so even when she was more able-bodied, I think it was also fairly radical to be talking about Bob's sickness and some of her sort of more invisible sicknesses, which is something that's oftentimes marginalized and not talked about as much. And I think also Sheree's work, of course, encompasses much more than her collaborations with Bob. She did a lot of work, documenting, the first ever Dyke March on Washington, D.C., Club Fuck, collaborating with and documenting the trans community, and being sort of a participant observer in many of these groups. So again, it doesn't necessarily speak to the exact question of where you place bodies of varying degree of ability and how they exist politically. But I think that Sheree's practice has spoken to this in a lot of different ways. And I may be misinterpreting the question, but I also think that the question sort of assumes also that the dom or the dominatrix is center in those relationships. And sometimes it's actually more of the submissive. And so there's this, I think, strange paradox in Sheree's work that we're sort of hinting at tonight, that she's sort of everywhere and nowhere because her work is oftentimes propping up other people and helping support them. So I, again, could be misinterpreting the question, but I feel like there's a sort of connotation I do not enjoy within that question. But
responsibility, I think I must have said the question where I didn't read it as that, you're thinking about like women's and feminist sexual empowerment, and you're also breaking these boundaries around what is considered sick and healthy and pathological, normal, and that's how I interpret it. So I'll take the blame for whatever.
That's all right. That's all right. It's getting
There's
late.
also,
We've been talking a long time.
I think my body is at its limit. I'm actually recovering from a lower back injury right now, so I'm at my limit, I think, too. But just like quickly, kind of in response to that question, is also just this idea that if you are non-able-bodied, that the sexuality and your ability to perform are shut down or limited, and so much of what you've worked on with Bob and with Martin and in relationship to your entire career is about showing that it actually multiplies the possibilities of performance and of sexual practice, especially when you're thinking about BDSM and non-heteronormative sexual practices. All of that is about pushing against some of these normative ideas that are sort of mapped onto something.
I think the work that Bob and I did, and the work that Martin does, and the work I did with Rhiannon, is transgressive. Definitely transgressive. We are telling people you don't have to do what everybody else does. You can be weird if you want to be. You can be dangerous as long as you do it safely. But I mean, I think we are a threat. I think personally, I feel that Bob and I were a threat to the more normative ways. I mean, I identified most of my life as a heterosexual woman. I am anything but a heterosexual woman, but that's how I identified. And I think when you break out of those boundaries, that is dangerous. But I think what's happening with the pandemic is now people's maybe smug ideas. Well, I'm healthy and I'm fine. I can do anything. And I think that's not true anymore. So I think everybody has to maybe re-examine their place in society and what they want to do with their lives. I think it's maybe waking up people in ways they maybe don't even want to be woken up. And art, I thought I could do it through art. Maybe that was my ego thinking I could change the world through art. But I think the pandemic is changing the world far more profoundly, far more profoundly. And I don't know if it's going to be what the end result will be. I'm old now, and I won't probably live to see what kind of dystopian society we're going to be faced with, and in some ways I feel sad about that. I'm curious, but on the other hand, I've lived a very long and a very interesting life. And if I did anything to make some women feel empowered and feel they could break out of their rut and they don't have to follow all the rules and they're still good people. And some men can decide they don't have to be on top all the time. They can find pleasure in other ways of being and maybe more satisfaction in being a little more on the submissive side. If I did that at all, I would die happy. If that, but that, that's for posterity and not for me to decide. But yet I just want to tell you, as a scholar, there's no one better than you. You are the top. And as a person, you are empathetic, you're funny. I love that you know so much about music and you know so much about cocktails. I mean, you're just an amazing, I'm so happy that you took this project on. And also I want to thank Luka as well, who went through that archive as well and looked at it like, that I never did. And Amelia, I mean, and everybody, Judy and Rhiannon, everybody who's I've collaborated with has meant so much to me. And I'm just very happy that this is happening now. I think the book is important, just as for the future, if there is a future, and I have to be a little bit hopeful. I do have problems with depression, but this makes me very happy. Tonight, I'm very happy. And I think very happy to be part of this amazing group of people. Really, you're all wonderful.
Sheree, thank you for giving us, your art. And without you, none of this would be possible. And it's just been absolutely incredible. Like one of the most incredible scholarly part of my scholarship to be able to work with you. And also I'm grateful for your friendship, of course. So
we've gone over, right? It's almost
we've gone way over time, but it looks
Wow.
like people are still lingering. So I don't know if we want to wrap up. I don't know that my body can actually handle sitting for long.
I know, and poor Martin has to go to sleep.
I know, Martin, it's the middle of the night for you, right? Thanks everyone. Happy Hanukkah to those who celebrate. Tomorrow is Hanukkah.
Yeah, right.
Thanks everyone for coming.
Yeah. Thanks so much to all the panelists and to Sheree and to Juan, Lexi, and Jean.
Yes. Thank you, Juan and Lexi.
Yeah.
Yes.
And for more, buy the book. That's all I can say. We just covered a sliver tonight.
All right.
That's right.
Bye,
Thanks, all.
everybody.
Bye. Thank
Bye.
you.
Love you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in. Bye.
All right. Bye.